Am I saying welcome? Welcome, Drink with James, episode 200. This is the moment everybody has been waiting for. I know we have made it over 200 episodes. Well, not over, but we made it to 200 episodes. That is, how long have we been doing this?
I'd say like 4.5 years.
Jesus, really?
Wow. Can you believe that?
No, 4.5 years almost. Really? How long have you worked here?
Also, I'm mic'd up for this one. Just spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Coming in hot. I know we started I think late March or early April of 2016.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, for those of you who haven't watched every single episode, first of all, shame on you. You should always just start from one binge. I don't repeat myself once. It is all original content the whole way through. It's not totally true, but this was Tim. I know that this was your idea to do a show, right?
Yeah, it was my idea. I remember when I pitched it to you.
Yeah.
We were on a subway. We were going to. You're like, have you ever been to a sales meeting for us? And I was like, nope. He's like, cool, we're going to the sales meeting. And we went to the sales meeting. We were taking the train up and we were talking about it. And I was like, I think we should do this. And then you're like, well, I won't. I think you should do the show where you answer 3 questions about influencer marketing. And you're like, cool, I could be into that, but I have to drink while I do it. And I think we shot the first one, a day or 2 after that.
Yeah. And, it's funny. I would have never thought that we'd still be doing it 4.5 years later. But, I talk about like product market fit a lot, right? And we had tried a number of things in marketing. The company was probably, if that was 4 years ago, the company was probably 2 or 3 years old probably at that point. And we were just getting big enough where like we were starting to try to do some marketing things, right? We had this thing called the Quitters Club where we would like interview people when they quit their jobs, and we made these sweatshirts. There's a bunch of little things that we did, and like they never really took off, right? Like people thought they were cute, or like, it did okay for a little bit, and then interest fell off. But it was funny because that first episode, I remember we sent the email out about it, and I got like 10 emails back right away being like, this is awesome, you should keep doing this. And I think that like it was so clear that there was some need for this kind of thing in the space. There was really at that time there was no podcasts about influencer marketing. There was really no education about it. But it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, and do you think that I mean, I probably know the answer. You already alluded to it, but like, there's no way we thought we were ever going to get to 200. You remember when we hit 100, James?
Not really.
I remember like it was yesterday.
Not really.
I don't remember it that well, but I do know that we rented a white tuxedo jacket for you. We put gold streamers behind you. We somehow sourced you a crown.
Yes.
And you drank champagne out of a coupe.
Yes.
During that episode.
I do remember that. And it's funny. I mean, even back then, it was very much a YouTube show, and now I think maybe 20% of our consumption is on YouTube. It's funny just how much the world has changed in that time. And podcasts, which were a thing, I don't know, when does like This American Life and all that happen? 15 years ago? Mm-hmm. And then it just went silent for 7 years, and nobody talked about podcasting, and then it just fucking blew up.
It blew up, yeah.
For no real reason. There wasn't a technological advancement, right? Podcasting came about, I feel like, around the time of smartphones anyway. But yeah, and so now we're mainly a podcast, but I think it's nice to still do the video and stay true to our roots.
Stay true to your roots.
Yeah.
People are still. I think people. I'm always surprised how many people listen to music and consume music on YouTube. Mm-hmm. Just as a quick aside, listen to podcasts. Obviously, Joe Rogan moving to Spotify now, but people consume audio at length on YouTube, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and I it'll be interesting with the Joe Rogan stuff. Obviously, I'm not a big viewer of his. I just actually listened to my first Joe Rogan podcast the other day. But you do see you see the GIFs a lot. Memes and GIFs are such huge drivers of culture that I think if you look at Quibi, right? I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it because I've literally never heard anyone talk about it because it's such a failure. But I remember when they launched, they didn't allow you to save or screenshot anything, which made it impossible to meme it. And I remember some people talking in the marketing space and talking about how that was going to kind of handicap them from being able to be a part of culture. Was that those GIFs and everything wouldn't be a part of it? And I feel like I really first became conscious of Joe Rogan watching with the GIF of Elon smoking a blunt.
Oh, for sure.
It's just how important was that? And now that he's coming off of video and moving away from that he loses all that ability to have anything visual, be a part of it. And it's going to be interesting to see, what that does.
Spotify got that big paycheck to Rogan. He's got to be getting. His YouTube royalties alone. That deal has to be insane.
I heard he was making $20 million a year on the podcast.
Yeah,
with just ads.
Yeah,
and stuff.
Yeah, so. You alluded to meme culture, and I think obviously things have come a long way. But since the start of the show 4.5 years ago, obviously influencer marketing has really exponentially grown since then. But for you, what's been the biggest change in the space in the past 4 years since the show started?
Yeah, first, everyone, obviously we're doing a little different format today. I know we just jumped right into it, but be that it is our 200th episode, we thought it'd be fun for Tim to kind of turn the table and have Tim interview me. So what was the biggest change since we started 4.5 years ago? I think that if you think of the most fundamental change, it's just that influencers are part of culture and pop culture and the vernacular of the world in a way that they just weren't 4 years ago. There's still definitely people 4.5 years ago, 4 years ago that I would say, oh, we do influencer marketing, and they would just have no idea what that is. And there's obviously still people that don't know what that is.
Sure.
But that's, I think, the biggest change is just how important influencers have become in culture.
Certainly. And what's really interesting, and this is kind of been a through line throughout the show, we kind of joked about it from the very beginning is are we going to have enough questions or new questions that keep these coming in? But what was really interesting is we found that the same questions were coming in, but just because the times were changing, the answers were different.
Yeah. And yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think that this show has been, I think really has been beneficial to the company and to me in a lot of ways. But I think that one of my big lessons from it is just how much I've learned from having to do this every week, and that those answers changed, yes, because the world changed, but also because I began to understand that world better, right? And I had to push myself to understand it better. And so it was really a big part of it was my understanding, fueled by, I think, the general growth in understanding the company and how sophisticated we were getting. That changed those answers so much in the way that I saw them.
Yeah. And, I think that as the show started to grow, and I think maybe we both started taking it more seriously, that's my question is when did you start taking it more seriously? 'Cause I know back in the day we would just write questions at the board, and I know you took it seriously, but it's when was it okay, this is a thing, and I want to come more prepared with my answers and give it more thought? Or one of the part of the early tenants and what made it so great, it was it was so off the cuff that it was oh, it was just really fun. And so was there a shift for you mentally where it's oh, I can just come in and rely on my own anecdotes, or how much preparation were you coming in with?
Yeah. Honestly, it's something I grapple with because I don't prepare.
Yeah.
I think that we always wrote the questions on the board. Maybe 6 months ago, I started seeing the questions a couple days in advance, but like a lot of times the questions we think we're going to answer, I end up like not wanting to answer the day of. I can be kind of mercurial and like,
That's news to me, James. I never once gathered that.
Some days I'm just like, yeah, I'm not doing this today. Yeah, I don't prepare, and I think that I go back and forth on that. And I'm reading or listening to this book on Winston Churchill right now. And obviously one of the great orators of history, right? And
Certainly.
he has so many quotes, right? He's so quotable, but that is because like literally everything he said, he wrote down. Like he was meticulous in that, right? And sometimes I think, should I be doing that? Would this show be better if I stepped back and took those questions and really wrote out what I was going to say? But sometimes it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think that like what's different now is we have a support system. We have a team that helps get those questions and allows me to say, oh, can you do a little more research in that? Or can you pull me examples? Or can you get some data to support that? That I think has been really helpful. But I've tried to keep it still pretty off the cuff, and I definitely don't know what I'm going to say before I say it. But I think that like this has been my life for 12 years now, putting shit onto the internet and talking about that and being in this space. And so I think I should be able to, just talk about it.
For sure.
I shouldn't really need to prepare. And I think that is what's kept the show kind of interesting and hopefully, and honestly, at this point, I don't have time. Like I just wouldn't have time to plan it and to write it out and to be more meticulous, because when the office is up and humming, we've got 45 minutes, an hour set aside for Drink with James every week. That's it. Other than that, my day is like totally full. So there's really just like, it's not possible.
Sure. Yeah. And obviously, you're so good at that, and that's what makes it entertaining, because you don't know what you're going to say. Makes it very quotable, certainly. But, on the other hand, we've encountered some backlash, over the years, saying some, as you say, mercurial things, just because it's unscripted and such. How do you deal with that, and how do you balance that with with the show being non-scripted?
Yeah. Look, one, you and now Brian have been helpful editors. I think that if I say something that feels like without context it would be misinterpreted, you guys do a great job of taking that out. But I've we have published things that, looking back, I regret saying them. I regret the way that I said them. I regret not providing that full context. But more of it was that like there was a lesson there I needed to learn. It's been really interesting, I think, having pushback on some things that I've said and having to learn how to deal with that. And then seeing other people, public figures, much more well-known than I am, go through a crisis similar at a much larger scale. I'm not patting myself on the back in any way, but it has been, I think, helpful to go through those things, and to know that like, if somebody is offended by what you say, it's your job to like understand that, hear them, and then try and work to fix it,
Yeah.
And then every time that I feel like that we've had pushback, I've always tried to then open the platform up to that voice and say, hey, why don't you come on the show and let's talk about this, because, if you're not learning and growing, then like, what's the point, right? And I always was really appreciative of the pushback, because I would prefer somebody raise their hand and say, hey, like the thing you said sounds kind of fucked up to me. I'd rather that than not hear about it.
Yeah.
And then like selfishly, I lose that opportunity for growth. But more importantly, that person loses the opportunity to like be able to like voice that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, our platform isn't huge, but that's the least we can do, I think, when we've offended somebody, is to offer that platform.
Yeah.
Because, you know, again, we're all learning. And I think that if you look at all of these, you know, if you look at cancel culture, if you look at all of these dramas, that like once the person authentically feels like they are at a place where they want to learn, you know, that like generally people are pretty accepting of that. You know, like there's that great quote of Obama talking about cancel culture, and he says that like, you know, if what you're doing on the internet is like yelling at people and like calling them out, that like that's not activism, right? That like that's not really going to get you very far. And I think generally when those parties can get to a place where they're like, the offended party feels heard and the person who offended them authentically apologizes and is making steps to like correct that like generally people are pretty accepting.
Yeah, for sure.
But most people's initial reaction is to say like, it's not fair that you're mad at me, which is human, but like completely misguided and wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a very profound learning, and it was really, I was kind of inspiring to see how you dealt with those situations, kind of like from my position, and it sounds like that's a kind of a lesson and a 10 that you would take with you for the rest of your life, irrespective of your YouTube show. For you, what are some other maybe things that you've learned personally that maybe surprised you from doing this show for 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like a lot of the lessons we learn are ones we're just like relearning all the time, right? It's things you knew, but you're just like being reminded of it, right? Like I think that like the more you can give, the better, right? Like I sit in this unique position in the industry where like I was at one point one of the more followed people in the world. So I've seen that. I've worked with brands, not in the capacity that influencers do today, because when I was there was no money, but like I've worked with brands in the capacity of a person that publishes things online. Then I started this company, and I've obviously seen it from the other side, seen it from the side of like us paying influencers, but also understanding the viewpoint of our clients. And so I've never like gotten less back than what I gave away, you know, and that like just giving away knowledge, you know, whatever it is that you have, giving that away has been incredibly beneficial. And, you know, it definitely changed, I think, some of the way that I think about and like, you know, before we started Drink with James, education wasn't part of what we did at all, right? Like the idea was like when we learned something that worked, it's some insight, that was like competitive advantage. That was something that kept us ahead of our competitors, right? And we wouldn't share that unless you were paying for it as a client. And I think that makes sense if you're making cars or you're a manufacturer or, you know, something like that. But we, you know, it is harder to show what we do. Like as a business, you know, what's the difference between and the hundreds of competitors we have now? You know, it's not like cars. You can't sit in them, drive them around, read the reviews, you know. And so what do you have to show that you're different? And it became increasingly clear as we started to do more education that was something we could prove, that like if we were willing to give this knowledge away, imagine what we weren't giving away. And there are things that we don't tell people,
sure,
right? There are things that we don't give away. There's technology and algorithms and all this stuff that we have. But it felt by giving that stuff away, it kind of gave us some legitimacy. You know, it gave us some authority. And I think that's been a lesson I'll certainly take with me. And I think that like another is that as this company has grown, you know, it's been harder for me to stay connected to the day-to-day of the business, right? To like, when we started Drink with James, I was very involved in executing those campaigns. I was seeing the emails back and forth from influencers to us. I was on the briefing calls with brands. I don't do any of that anymore. And so this show is like something that keeps me connected to that. And I think that as a leader, as someone who runs a company, that's been hugely important, to be able to stay connected to the actual work, and understand it.
Yeah, for sure. And you may not have an answer to this, but is there a favorite moment or like a moment that sticks out in your mind more than any other when maybe you reflect on the past 200 episodes?
There's no one moment. I think that, it is never not impactful when someone comes up to you and says that, like, something you've done, something you've said, a piece of advice has benefited them, and to hear that, I think that is always a bit of a thrill, because I don't, this isn't my job, like, and I'm not, a lot of times, like, I don't think I do a good job, like, getting high on my own supply per se, and that, like, I don't take my own advice when it comes to the content we put out, right? Like, I don't do a good job reading the comments on the YouTubes. I've actually never watched an episode, but that's more because I don't like to listen to myself talk. But I don't do the things an influencer would do if they had a podcast or something. I don't do a great job promoting it. I don't do a great job engaging with people about it. And so sometimes it doesn't feel real, right? It's just like, I sit in this room, I record something. I know my mom watches it every Monday morning because she posts something about it. But at this point, the show's been going on long enough that it's not like, hundreds of people are tagging us when an episode comes out, right? Like, and so you start to detach from the actual effect of it and the reason we're doing it, right? Like, is there some marketing benefit to doing Drink with James for 4? Absolutely. Like, the show has definitely made us money. That's not a question. Has it made enough money to justify the hundreds and hundreds of hours we've spent on it? Like, probably over 1,000 hours with editing and everything? Maybe not. So, like, the value is in that. It is about, like, helping people, and when someone comes up and says that they're making more money, or they quit their job, or just that they feel inspired again to, like, put their head down and go to work, that's pretty cool if you get to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I think in the early days we had a lot more guests on the show, and we've kind of waned in that in the last 50 or so episodes. It's crazy to say that. But we've had some memorable guests on the show. For you, I mean, is there anyone who's been maybe your favorite or top couple favorite guests on the show for whatever reason?
I mean, I talk about Jamie Beck all the time, and she's probably been my favorite guest. Not probably, she has been, but obviously Jamie's been a friend for over 10 years. And she lives in France, and I just don't get to see her much. So, like, honestly, those times are nice to just be able to catch up with her. But I also think that, her brain works different than mine. And then a lot of people's, right? Like, she's an artist, and so she sees this world so differently. And so I think I've really enjoyed hearing her talk about this stuff, because the advice she would give is probably very different than the advice I would give, because, like, we literally just don't see the world in the same way. The things we want out of life, all of that is, like, very, very different. The way we live our lives is different. And so I think, where we've sometimes struggled to find guests is that, like, I want a contrarian voice. Like, that is what's interesting, right? When somebody that you're interviewing sees the world in a different way than you do. Like, you know, while I'm not humble, right, generally, I'm pretty confident in saying, like, I know I, like, am good. I'm a pretty good writer. I'm good at speaking. I'm like, I can string a sentence together. And so, like, honestly, like, finding somebody, if someone has the same viewpoint as I do, the chances that they can, summarize something as well as me, who's been doing this for 200 episodes, is like low, right? Like, this is all I do is talk about this, and not just on the show. Like, I've probably been to thousands of meetings with brands, not probably, definitely thousands of meetings, and talked about this over and over and over. That's my job, right? And so I think the reason we've had less guests is it's harder to find those contrarian voices. And it's hard sometimes to find people that are thinking about the business side of this as intensely as we are here. We've got 38 people or whatever all working on this, and like, this show is like a conduit for all of those insights. So a person who has hundreds of thousands of followers, probably isn't going to have the same level of insight into how that happened, why it happened, how they became successful as we would.
Yeah. And speaking of insights, obviously you give them at scale every week. Has there been one or maybe even a couple that you found that have resonated with the audience more than others?
Sometimes, like, you guys will post Instagram of like a forethought. And I was like, oh, that's clever. Forgetting I said it. I think there's nothing that comes to mind, but I think where I am, and maybe there's a lesson in this, I think, like, I have this, like, tendency towards complication, right? Like, I want to understand something at its absolute highest level, and often at the detriment of being able to explain it more simply, and I think that I don't have any interest, like, in, as I said, I've been trying to follow more people that I generally in the past have disregarded, because me disregarding them generally comes out of jealousy more than anything else. But, I think I said recently I was following Gary Vee for the first time.
Right.
And, incredible what he's been able to do. Very impressive.
Certainly.
Big following, that life isn't interesting to me. A life where what you do is, let's just, like, recycle advice over and over again, is just like, that's just like not my path, and so sometimes I think I'm bad at, like, bringing it down really simply. I think that's something that, like, Gary does so well, is, like, take something that complex like success, boil it down to a sentence that gets someone fired up and gets them to want to go out and work harder, and I think a lot of people roll their eyes at that, but there's a lot of value in there, and that's a skill there. Whereas, like, I look at that same success and I probably want to, in detail, explain the 50 things that happened to get there, rather than be like, just crush it, just, like, wake up and hustle, just work, And so I think it makes the advice less digestible, and so, yeah, I think it's something I could do better. And then, so there's no, like, oh, there's one quote, there's one thing,
right. Well, it's interesting because you said you don't. I would be curious how you know that insight, right? Do you because you don't watch the episodes, if you've already alluded to, and so are you getting that insight from comments or for people that have come up to you, or are you hearing yourself doing it in real time?
I think I see people that are good at it, and I'm like, I don't do that. I don't do that. You
And
know?
and what is really interesting, and we talked about it, I think a few weeks ago or something, and you're like, I don't listen to any podcasts. It's like,
Yeah.
cool. I mentioned like 3 of the biggest podcasters in the world, and you're like, yeah, I listen to the Daily.
Yeah.
And obviously, you're getting all your information from books and magazines and such, as from what I know. And for you, maybe can you elaborate on how much you, maybe not for the show specifically, but are learning, and how important learning is for you and what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I love learning. I mean, you know, it's so intoxicating. Learning something new, growing is, I don't think there's anything better in the world than growth, you know, than being able to look back and say, like things are different. I'm different. I'm better. I'm smarter. You know, I've often said that's why I love New Year's and birthdays so much, is that like it gives you this chance to look back and take stock of your life and your station and say, wow, I have come a long way, you know, because that change is usually incremental and you don't feel it. And so it's hard to acknowledge it because it happens so slowly generally. So it's always been, you know, it's always been a big part of my life. Now, I also, you know, I think when did you interview? It was the first foreground, right? We did a long interview in the first foreground.
Yeah, that was
episode 1.
Episode 1, like basically January 1 of 2019.
Yeah. So I talked about, you know, how being different was like such a driver in my life. And that's true of what I consume as well, is that like I want to be consuming different things from other people. You know, I don't want to be listening to the most popular podcast. And, you know, I like to, I don't know, like I just have always had this aversion to things that were well-known and like popular. And that I don't totally know what that like comes from, like what that is. Because, you know, because if a lot of people are learning something from a certain podcast, then like it probably means it's pretty good, you know?
Right.
But there is a, you know, there's the like desire to grow as a person, and then there's the responsibility to grow as a leader. You know, that like growing up, my dad started the company, and he eventually was like booted out of that company by his board. And I remember as a kid not understanding that. How can you get fired from your own company? It doesn't make sense, you know? There was all these market forces and all this shit happening, and they just kind of needed a scapegoat, and that's what happens to CEOs. And generally for public companies, that's why CEOs make so much money, because most of the time they have a, you know, 3 to 5 year lifespan max, and then it takes years to get another job. So like they're always kind of held up as a scapegoat, and if something goes wrong, they just get fired, if it's their fault or not. But, you know, for shareholders, we have investors, like I can be fired from this job, you know? And so there's that reality. And then there's the reality that like, if you're ambitious and you want to get to a certain place, that like you understand how far you are from that place, and you understand how much growth needs to happen to get there. And so you have a responsibility to grow yourself so that the people under you can continue to grow as well, right? Like I've always said, if the company doesn't keep growing, then the smart, ambitious people who work here, which is everyone, will look around and leave. They'll start leaving, right? Because if you're really talented and you're ambitious and your job never changes, why would you stay? I mean, you and I have had this conversation. You know, we sat in a room. I didn't have an office then, I think. And you were like, yo, like my job's not much different than it was, you know, a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago. And you said it would be, and it's not. And like, if it doesn't change, I'm gonna have to look other place. I don't want to, But like that's the reality, right? That like you have to keep growing. So like it becomes like not an option. You know, grow or die is a thing that like the organization will outgrow you. Your friends could outgrow you. Your significant other could outgrow you. You know, so I think generally a life without growth would be my worst nightmare. So it's never been. I guess it's just also just not a hugely conscious thing. It's just like it's like oxygen.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask you. Is that like an inherent thing? Is that just kind of like come with you as a being, or is that something that you've had to grow? Not it's a terrible pun, but is that something you had to cultivate, especially in your later years as as this company started to grow?
Yeah, I think I've always had, some of it is conscious, right? Like, I think I've told this story before, but like I can remember walking through my campus in college, like sophomore year, and know exactly where I was. I can place it. I can like remember the day, and just being like, I want to become well-read. I didn't really know what that meant, but like I started reading 50 to 60 books a year outside of my schoolwork, and not reading like trash books. Not reading like, Stephen King. It's not trash. There's some good Stephen King, but like reading like the great books, And so it like, that like became important to me. I think like being smart is important to me. Like, I try and surround myself with like people that I would consider to be like intellectual. I don't have much of an interest in small talk. And so, I think a lot of it is conscious because I am also pretty hard on myself, and I'm like, I'm nothing. I know nothing. I'm terrible. And, where I want to be is so far from where I am that I'm constantly trying to like jump over that abyss. And it just like seemingly gets wider and wider. I think we've talked about before that like, I used to write a lot about the way I saw the world, about marketing, about all of these things. And I don't do that much anymore. I mean, we have this and I talk about influencer marketing, but like, I don't write as much publicly as I used to when I had the blog. And it's been interesting that like the more successful I become traditionally, the less confident I often am in my like viewpoint, because I've seen so many times that it's flawed, because the people I look up to seem so much more skilled and so much more knowledgeable that I'm like, why would I open my mouth? Right. And we didn't start this show until 3-4 years into 4 starting. And that was because we didn't do any marketing really, because I didn't feel like I, knew what to say yet. I didn't really understand the space well enough.
I'm going to go back to something you just said, and I think is really interesting. As curious as one, your employee and someone that's inspired by you, but like, where do you want to be? What's the ceiling? Where would you get to where you're like, all right, I'm where I want to be?
I don't think I'll ever get there. I think that like, I want to be one of the best, where do I want to be? Yeah, like one of the best CEOs in the world. What does that mean? I don't know. I want to see like how far I can take it, and so like when I think about 4 and people are like, how big do you want it to be? And I'm like, if I think this company could have 1,000 employees, 5,000 employees, and if we could get there, like, I would love that. Some people like to like keep things smaller. Like I went to the New York Stock Exchange recently and I saw them ring the bell, and I was just like, obviously I need to do that. Like obviously bringing a company public is like something I want to experience. Running a public company is something that I want to experience. So, but I don't think in talking to, I always ask the people I respect, like, does that feeling that you're not enough, does that like imposter syndrome, does that ever go away? And everyone has said no. That like that's just a constant, and if you can live in that, if you can live constantly feeling like you aren't doing enough, that you aren't enough, that you aren't good enough, and if that inspires you, then I think you can be successful. I mean, it's why I sometimes have a harder time with like wellness in general, right? Is that like, whether or not it is healthy, I'm sure it's not. You're an athlete, right? Like, the motivations that drive you to excel in anything, excel, generally are not healthy, right? Like, they're generally pretty destructive.
Sure.
To the other relationships in your life, to your well-being, to your, you mentally. But like, for me, it's like, what's the alternative? That you're like, have a calmer life without achievement? Because for me, like, achievement is so central in my life that I can't separate. Like, I just can't separate James the person from like James' achievements. And like, I understand that is unhealthy, but I also don't have a huge interest in changing it, honestly.
Well, one of the tenets you've always said, know thyself. No, I'd be curious, kind of turning on you, like, what open-ended, what are your thoughts when we kind of reflect back on this time?
It's just like, I just feel lucky. Like, I feel lucky I really enjoy doing it, and even as my life has gotten increasingly full and it's getting increasingly difficult to fit it in, I've really gotten so much enjoyment from it. And like, even if nobody really watched it, I enjoy doing it. And so I just feel like fortunate that we get to do this. I feel fortunate that we have a platform, to be able to talk about the things that I'm like so passionate about. Like, I love this stuff. I love this industry. I love watching all of these influencers kind of grow up and like take control of their lives and quit their jobs. And, some who are just starting out, that's still their dream, and there's always new people coming in. There's always new people that want to learn. And it's just, I think it's a gift. I think anyone with a platform should look at it that way and say, like, how lucky are you that, we have 100,000 people on the platform, and I wish 100,000 people listen to this show every week. They don't, bastards. But what a crazy thing to be able to talk to that many people,
Yeah.
We published an Instagram post yesterday about a shift in the company, which we'll talk more about in the coming weeks. The response was huge, and that response comes because we've been able to invest in the community. And I think that like investing in building a community always pays off,
Yeah.
And I feel lucky that you pushed me to do it. I feel lucky that we've been able to do it, and that it's been able to help the company. I mean, there were definitely conversations early on the first year in board meetings that like was like, this seems like a waste of your time. Like, that was a thing that came up often, and like that I sometimes got shit for doing it, because it, like any influencer creator knows, like putting yourself out there opens you up to vulnerabilities, right? And like we were putting me out there as like a thought leader, and I definitely got like poked fun at and seriously questioned by people internally at the company and investors if this was a good use of time, And I think that I feel fortunate that it's proven to be. I think that, if you and this is like why we always are encouraging people to just do things, because if we didn't do Drink with James, we don't do For You, we don't do the conferences, and we don't have education as an enormous part of our brand. Look, if we don't do Drink with James, I don't get called out by Valerie. I don't have a conversation with Valerie. We don't do freshman class. We don't pitch Sephora Squad to Sephora. We don't land that deal, you know? So like you can draw a line back to us doing a show where I answer 3 questions and drink, to landing our biggest client and putting a campaign into the world that is transformative and seen in the industry as absolutely the, you know, probably the best, certainly beauty campaign, I would say, ever in the influencer space. Draw that line directly back to the show. And that is why doing things and trying new things is so important, because like you just don't know the dominoes. You don't know where it's going to lead. I know we're running decently long now, but you know, I'm interested for you, what you know, what has been some of your insights doing this for 4 years now?
Well, I mean, it was funny because I'd always write the episode number on the board back when we had the board, and you know, it was crazy to think that we would always be like, when we get to 100, and like to think that, you know, we'd ever get to 200, and you know, I haven't been a part of this as much as I was probably. I haven't been as much part of like the last 50 episodes, maybe 40, as I once was, and I miss it. I was, as we probably talked about, I was reluctant to let it go because it was just a nice insight. And it was funny because as you were talking about how to build influencers accounts, I was building Ford's account essentially, you know? And so it was really fun for me to kind of take what I was learning, because I didn't know anything about the industry. Like you had this background in content creation for these big brands. I didn't have that. And so like for me, this was a learning point for me. And I think that like, I don't know when I started like being able to like ask you questions in the show, but that was a big pivotal moment for me, because like then I was thinking about things in a different way. And so like for me, I use this as a learning for myself. And like, then I learned from my side how to, you know, I mean, grow the brand based off your advice, you know, a lot of times. And so, you know, I think a lot of times it's been really fun for me to do this and try and push you to do it, and push Brian to do it. And because I see the value in it. And you know, it's not as big as we want it to be, but what's really interesting is like the people that watch it want to watch it. They really do. And they look forward to it every week. And like, I wish we had 100,000 followers too. And we should. But you know, the thousands of people that listen or watch it every week is really want to listen to it. And that's great for me. It's been really fun for me to do this, and it was I essentially got me a job. So yeah. Thanks for wanting to do it, James. But you know, I've learned countless things over the years, and you know, I find myself in conversations a lot of times now with Foreground, with the podcast, and just in general, find myself quoting you in the show, and I think that you know, that speaks volumes.
Yeah, I think that like something that's unique about it, and what makes it impossible for the show to be massive, is it's not entertainment. You know, it's not entertainment. It's very niche, but like, while the audience, yes, is smaller than we would like, because everyone wants to be huge, right? I think the unique thing is that like, it is really helping people, you know, and I think that is like very cool, and it's hard, right? That like, unlike a lot of like motivational type content, look at Gary Vee, a lot of times that's about inspiring people who aren't doing something to try and do it, which is super important.
Sure.
But the pool of people that haven't done something but want to, and want to believe that they will, even though they probably never will, is enormous. We're speaking to people that like, they're doing it.
Yeah. Like
they are out there trying to do it. And there are not a lot of resources out there. And like, to be able to help, you know, for some people, I hope, and we've certainly heard this, that like this is like money in their pocket. This is feeding their families. This is paying rent. Like it has helped with that. And I think that's, that's really unique and cool, that like, it's not like, oh, I think you're funny and the show's funny and I find it interesting. It's like, no, this literally like made me more money or allowed me to quit my job to like do something I love or move to New York or feel confident enough to like put myself out there or start a TikTok or something like that. So I think, I think you should be proud of that. And I know I am, and I appreciate everyone who's listened over the years and continues to push us and ask questions. It's a real honor to do it, and no real plans in stopping. So
a lot of times, it's two people in a room. You're talking to a camera. A lot of times, you say the advice and you answer the questions and you go on about your day. It's an hour of your week. It maybe it's just kind of an afterthought after what you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But like, what is it like when someone comes up to you and says those things that like your hour of your week changed my life? Like how grounding and how I guess bringing you back to like actually helping people is that?
Yeah. Honestly, I don't feel like many people, a lot of influencers talk about this. People come up to them on the street and stuff, and I find it embarrassing. Like I'm embarrassed. Generally, that probably goes back for me, like not them. Like it is incredible, and like it's, again, as I said, it's like such a high to hear that. But like the first reaction for me is to probably feel embarrassed because I feel like do I deserve that? Like, that feels weird. It's a strange thing that if you have any like imposter syndrome, that your first reaction is like, you don't deserve that praise, really, know? And I try and hold on to that because like, I think when you start believing that you deserve it, it becomes a whole different beast.
Sure.
So yeah, I think what I feel is sad that like, they're not listening to someone smarter.
I think, I'm really excited to hear this. 100, we were, I don't know when that was. Geez, it was probably just a little bit, 50.
2 years ago? Yeah.
That's a little under 2 years. I think it was obviously summertime. 300, right?
Yeah.
One, do you think we'll get there? And then two, what would you like to see maybe change in the industry, or I guess where would you like to see the industry at 300, and what that would be like 2 years from now?
2 years from now.
Hopefully we're out of quarantine by then.
Yeah, hopefully there's a vaccine. I think 2 years from now, what I'd like to see it grow. I'd like to see influencers only become a more important part of the space. I'd like to see some of the things that aren't great about it that we're addressing with like ambassador marketing change. It become less transactional, all of that. But I think more importantly, like what will happen is that like the generational shift hasn't happened yet. Like the influencers who are at the top of the industry largely are still the people who started 10 years ago, who started fashion and beauty blogs 10 years ago, And there's been individual players that have spiked up, and there's like people who have gotten mega famous. And I would say that like, the James Charleses of the world aren't influencers. They're just celebrities now. So it's a little different, but the people who are 22, 23, 24, 25, who aren't, as far as money goes, aren't making as much money as their 35-year-old counterpoints. I think that that generational shift is going to happen, where we could see, some influencers. Well, we're just going to see new faces come in a much bigger way. TikTok is going to speed that along as that takes a bite out of what Instagram is doing. I think Instagram's about to launch their TikTok competitor. Yet to be seen if they can. It's not going to be like Insta Stories was for Snapchat. There's no way. It's not going to just kill it instantly like that did. So Instagram's got a fucking hell of a fight on their hands for the next few years. Yeah. That's good for the space. That just makes things more interesting. Forces Instagram to move faster. Forces TikTok to move faster. And always there's room for something else. But yeah, there's as this becomes established, it becomes more competitive. And I think that we are going to start. I'd say the average age of people we work with is probably 28 to 30. I think that will probably stay pretty consistent. So who's the new crop? Who's the next thing? Who are the next big people that we're working with? And can the influencers who we love and who we work with now, can stay relevant?
I think that your outlook on the next 2 years is a great place to kind of wrap this up. Any parting words on Drink with James 200 as we leave, as we exit after an hour of conversation? We appreciate you listening to this.
I would say, if you're still listening, I've already said thank you, so I'm not going to thank you again. I'm not kissing your ass that much. I would say, if there's something you're thinking about doing, just do it. Again, I talked about how impactful, how long the fingers of this show are as far as the company goes in our path, and the reason to start something isn't necessarily what you're going to get out of starting it, but where it's going to lead you, and then where that's going to lead you, and then where that's going to leave you. And so if you are thinking about starting something, but you have been afraid to, or you aren't sure that it's going to work or whatever, if I could impart anything on you, I would say just do it, because it will lead you somewhere, and that place will be valuable regardless of the success or failure of that thing. And I think Drink with James has taught me that, and has made me more willing to try things and put myself out there. And so I hope it can inspire you guys to do the same. And thank you, Tim, for your many years of service. And I look forward to many more bottles, honestly, of whiskey and Negronis, and to talking to you guys every week. So cheers.